All right, so our first panel of the day is going to be our Startups and SPACs panel. So we have our moderator, Gareth Keane. We have Jeromy Grimmett of Rogue Space, Richard French of RocketLab, Jyostna Budideti of Spacesense.ai, and we have Jordan Wachs. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves and kick off the discussion.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Scarlett. Hey, everybody, I'm Gareth. I thought I would just start by giving you a couple of minutes on me, and then I'll let the panel introduce themselves as we go down along the line here. My name is Gareth Keane. I started life as an engineer, spent a lot of years working in the electronic engineering field, did a PhD back in the late 1990s, probably before some of you were in elementary school, and worked in industry for close to 10 years, turned to the dark side in sort of the late 2000s. Ended up doing an MBA and using that to get into the venture industry. I didn't do it at Sloan. I did it slightly further down the coast in Philly, so I missed out on getting into here. We have been coming to New Space for a couple of years. We think it's a really interesting event. It sort of is one of the leading New Space conferences we feel. And as a firm at Promus, we're pretty actively involved in the space industry. Our most recent fund is about $140 million US. It's domiciled in Luxembourg, one of the leaders in sort of the emerging New Space ecosystem. And from that fund and across sort of the historical Promus funds, we probably have north of 20, 25 companies that are either directly space or space adjacent. And we've invested in some great outcomes, such as RocketLab. Richard is here on the panel, which went public 2 years ago through a SPAC. So having said that, I'm going to hand over to Jeromy and sort of hear a little bit about Rogue.
My name is Jeromy Grimmett, and founder CEO of Rogue Space Systems. We do space robots to deliver in-space servicing for the new space market. So think souped up versions of R2-D2. We were officially founded in 2020. This conference actually is pretty special to me. This is where I actually decided to start Rogue. So in 2019, I came to this conference and I walked out and became part of the space industry. So it was literally just like that. So I'm happy to be here. We're located just north, right in Laconia, New Hampshire. So we're not far, got a team of about 30, and we're very, very active, very aggressive. So great to be here.
Richard.
Richard French, I lead business development strategy for RocketLab Space Systems. Hopefully folks know RocketLab is the global leader in dedicated small launch. Just had our 34th launch out of Wallops Island yesterday, a couple of Capella spacecraft. We've got Neutron coming by the end of 2024 to fill the larger launch vehicle market. And then Space Systems. Of course, that's where the action is really at. If you follow our quarterly financials, you'll know that Space Systems now contributes more than 2/3 of our top line and is a really huge engine of our growth. And so vertically integrating to offer the lowest total cost of ownership to our customers as well as to ourselves.
Hello everyone. My name is Jyostna. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SpaceSense. What we do at SpaceSense is nothing to do with the space industry in terms of our users. So we help companies, industries across the board, which are non-traditional users of space, to really benefit from this technology of satellite data. And the main pathways we help them create are how do they mitigate their impact on climate change, as well as how do they adapt and become more resilient with climate change. And the way we do that is we really simplify, abstract, and automate a lot of the processes and work that is required to take the raw satellite data we get today to the point where they can create and get their insights at the end. And we do it in a way that they are not dependent on us, but their existing teams can directly take our solution and build it completely themselves. And I think one of the very exciting things we are doing very recently is opening this platform to everyone who is willing to create solutions for the climate change so that you have the power in your hands to start creating. Well, thank you.
Great, thank you. Jordan.
All right, my name is Jordan Wachs. I'm Director of Business Development for SpaceRake. We're a very new startup that's being spun up here in the Boston area, just down the road at 1 Kendall Square. A lot of us are MIT affiliated or adjacent, and we're really excited to start to bring some of the technology that we've been working on in different spaces to play here in the aerospace industry, specifically looking to streamline the transmission of data from low Earth orbit satellites of all different sizes, small satellites or large swap-constrained satellites, down to the ground, and get that user data out to stakeholders outside of the ivory towers and the aerospace industry itself. So companies such as SpaceSense, these are partnerships that we see potentially forming so that we can get more data from satellites out to actual users to bring value from within the aerospace industry to the rest of the globe.
Great, thank you. So I thought we would have just a conversation about the industry and sort of opportunities, and then maybe 5-10 minutes at the end for questions, if anybody wants to ask any questions. So we have a pretty interesting sort of spread across the value chain here. We have launch, we have sort of in-orbit servicing, we have communications, and then we have sort of analytics and sort of the understanding of data that comes back from space. Maybe each of you could sort of point out 1 or 2 areas where you think there's real value to be created. The industry historically has been the domain of governments, right? It's been sort of driven by government dollars. And as investors, we like to see sort of real sort of economic business cases. So maybe, Jordan, start with you with some thoughts around what you think is exciting in sort of the space industry and where value can be created.
Yeah, sure. So great question. And as you pointed out, it's been traditionally the domain of governments for the last 50 years or so, and going back even further. But they have demonstrated time and again that there is an enormous amount of value in the space industry. One of the biggest challenges, though, and actually ironically, one of my least favorite terms is the phrase, it's rocket science. That puts up walls. It makes it seem opaque for people outside of the industry. It's really easy for us in the industry to get excited about it, but it makes it harder to communicate the value to people outside of the industry. So what we're looking to do is try to streamline and facilitate the movement of data. And we've got a lot of different analogs for how that can benefit society here on the ground. As 4G and 5G came online for your cell phones, your iPhone is a really impressive little device. It's got a great processor. It's got a surprisingly large amount of memory. It's got a nice little battery. But the real magic comes from the fact that your iPhone can talk to any other connected device on the planet. And we want to see every satellite become one of those connected devices. Continuous access to satellites into space. We think that that's going to bring a lot of different stakeholders that are not traditionally part of the space industry. We're going to bring those people, bring those minds into how to use these data that we're collecting from satellites. And we're going to see a lot of value, I think, emerge just from the nature of bringing more people into it, more use cases, and more clever applications.
Great, thank you. Jyostna, how about you guys in the analytics stack?
Absolutely. So I think we are very close to the value creation in terms of where Jordan is based. So one lucky thing for us is we're much closer to the end user, and we really see them creating the value on the other end. And in fact, many times we help them create it either faster or actually more efficiently. So I think one of the best ways to share this is actually give examples of what people have done with our solution. I think one of the biggest use case with us has been, how do I look at agriculture and look at the climate impact, and how do we help our growers grow more efficiently, and where can space data help in this? And a lot of it has been in a very immediate effect, something as simple as one of our users took our platform, built a solution with their agronomic data scientist in less than 4 to 5 weeks, brought it out to their farmers, and that helped them reduce the use of how much of fertilizer do they use without impacting the final yield. And now this is fantastic for them. They are happy to use less of it. At the same time, they have been now using it more and more to say, okay, how can I help you be more sustainable in terms of growing agriculture? But at the same time, another really good success story has been a small startup that wanted to create a sustainable sourcing platform to bring transparency into the entire supply chain of battery technology. It took them a few weeks to identify what can be done with space in this realm in a way that can be efficient, scalable, and, well, actually it makes sense in terms of the business model. And they were able to very quickly go from an idea to a working prototype in a few weeks. And now they're looking to pilot this with mining companies. So this is, I think, this kind of final impact, and especially with industries and people who've never looked at space and said, oh, maybe I can do something with this,
sure,
has definitely been much more much has been happening much more than like even 2 years ago. I have been approached by companies. 2 years ago, there were companies I would never approach or that would never approach me, and now they are actively looking to say, I know this technology is useful, I want to figure out how to use this and help my company, but also my industry, and be more resilient. And also, I think the biggest changes I have seen is the insurance industry, an industry which is known to be really, really slow in changing anything. They are coming in and saying, oh, I really need to use this technology because this is where the future of insurance is. Things need to be better. And I think that is happening more and more. Definitely the pace of it is still something we need to look into. How fast is this happening? But I think the biggest challenge is that it is still not mainstream. It is still a very niche thing where there are far fewer number of people that understand how to do this transition compared to even machine learning or AI.
So now how do you fix that problem? How do you sort of broaden that sort of user base?
Definitely, one thing that has been helping is the kind of new business models the satellite data companies are coming with, because there is the skill gap, but there is also the gap of the business models. A lot of times we don't use a certain type of data because even though it's the best data to use, we can't because it doesn't make a business case. Wow. So that change of new business models and even the lower cost is definitely increasing the usage, but the biggest blocking point is, like I said, the knowledge gap. And one of the ways that has been shifting is by companies like us, as well as Microsoft is creating planetary computer. Google Earth Engine is trying to be more generic. So far, they were only catering to this very niche of scientists that already understood satellite data, remote sensing, but they're trying to expand that. And there are quite a few other companies like ours trying to say, okay, we need to simplify this, make it simpler so that this final end user is able to directly extract without having to spend $1 million and 10 to 12 months before they have something working.
Got you. Richard, how about you? What are you excited about from the point of view of the sectors and the value created out there?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because a lot of space companies struggle to add real value. And so, I mean, if we look at where is the money, where are the markets, telecommunications obviously is the largest element of space. And so, RocketLab is, currently building 17 satellites for Globalstar to provide direct to cell phone connectivity. And so that's real value. That's a very exciting, growth area. It's a challenge. These are 3 kilowatt, 700 kilogram platforms. They have to operate in a very challenging radiation environment, thermal, other technical challenges. And so that's exciting. I am bullish on geospatial. I've always been bullish on geospatial, but it's a very nonlinear business development process. So if you look at the overall market, and it's not that big, but it's growing, it takes somebody thinking about how do you really solve a problem, and then kind of reverse, and that's a different set of PhDs, then build the sensors, then build the satellites, then launch them. And so it's a very complicated value chain, but we're excited to be a part of it. We'll launch Black Sky later this month. We provide a huge amount of hardware as well as software into the Black Sky constellation, as well as launch them. And so we're very happy to be part of that value chain. There's a lot of excitement about new applications. It's a lot of push. We are excited to be there also. We're providing 4 satellites to Varda Space Industries to do in-space manufacturing, solving the hard problem of Earth entry with our propulsion systems and flexing our GNC muscles. And so it's cool to be part of that. There's a lot of, the jury is still out whether that is truly a value chain.
Got you. And then Jeromy, in-space servicing. What's the opportunity there?
Yes. So there's numbers. George Pullen, one of the economists at U.S. Space Force, one of our advisors, is estimating $4 trillion in-space economy by 2040. Today, I want to say it's almost $500 million of a space economy right now today. What's also interesting is that across 50 assets in geostationary orbit, there's well over $200 billion of revenue just across 50 assets in geostationary.
So you're talking lifetime extension, those kind of applications?
Lifetime extension, servicing, protection, monitoring, inspection, observation. You can akin this to, there's a couple of things here. So it's it's not just about what the economics or what we see right now, but it's the exponential growth of human capability within space that is really going to accelerate the applications and the technologies that we are developing there. And you can correlate that to that cell phone sitting on that table. And 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago now, we had no idea we would be capable of doing the things that we are doing with that device. There was all Star Trek, Star Wars types of stuff, right? Well, we have no idea the applications of what Rogue's robots are capable of right now. We don't know, because the market has figured out a way to cram a movie studio into that. Well, if it can cram a movie studio into this, what else can they do? There was a company came to us and said, hey, can we attach an end effector to resurface lenses in space? Wait, what? Yeah, we have a patent on a device to resurface and coat lenses in space. We didn't think of that. We just figured out, hey, we know how to build a really cool robot to do RPOD and do some really cool stuff in space. We had no idea. So the market is going to drive and tell us what the applications are. There's the other part of this, so it's the human potential that's going to drive the economics of this. The other part of this is, right now, the biggest customer is the government. You're 100% right. There is commercial market traction for in-space servicing. I am here to personally tell you that yes, it is happening. And we're not talking big constellation providers. We're talking smaller operators. A couple of satellites in LEO comes up to us at our booth in Satellite yesterday and says, look, I got a solar panel. It didn't deploy. We lost 60% capability on that spacecraft. Do you think you can boop it and get it?
Technical term, boop?
Yeah. You want to know some crazy stuff? There was one guy out of an insurance company, huge insurance company, one of their top space engineers, literally asked us, could you jiggle that solar panel for us out in GEO? Now, I'm just in the space industry. I'm expecting these high-minded, PhD engineer. Dude comes to me with jiggle.
Guys.
So at that point, I knew I was going to be okay, because Daddy taught me one thing. Don't ever worry about being the smartest guy in the room, but make sure the smartest guy in the room's working for you. So that's how I see it. The economics are there. We really focus and really drive in the human potential side, because that creativity is really what we foster at Rogue. And that's where we start driving our value, and that's why we've been successful so far. And that's why I think we're going to see this exponential growth in
Got you. So very much a
space.
build it and they will come kind of message.
I wouldn't say it's build it, they will come. They're already coming to us.
Telling you what to build.
They're right.
All right, cool. So it's interesting. None of you have actually pulled out the cislunar economy, which obviously Artemis is spending billions and billions of dollars on. And nobody's talked about some of the applications of existing space infrastructure. At Promus, we're a huge believer in the power of position navigation and timing, PNT constellations. So we have seen all kinds of interesting applications around that data. Interesting. Any thoughts just quickly about either lunar economy or PNT? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I'll be a downer and say it's not an economy. I mean, it's a government program. There are B2B opportunities in that program. It's dominated, of course, by a few very large investments in crewed systems. And, there's a lot of technical risk associated with that. Luckily, there's a few billionaires willing to finance it. The government, I think we could debate about whether this is good government policy. I mean, in the competition that we have, right now engaged with China, it's not clear that we should be betting the farm on, a few visionary billionaires who are willing to put their money in it. On the other hand, it's also an amazing expression of the American ecosystem, that these things exist and that the capital is there to apply to it. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch. I guess the other provocative statement I'll make is that, when we think about the non-crewed portion, like with the clips, we've seen companies go bankrupt already. So I think there's probably a different type of policy discussion to have about whether we should be, whether the government is really sophisticated enough to pick winners in the robotic domain when really they're driving companies to make very poor choices. And we've seen the results. And so, again, it'll be a very fascinating thing to watch.
May I tag on that? Okay. Cislunar is an interesting, it's an interesting environment technically, of course, but it's not necessarily, in my opinion, this is my opinion, it's not necessarily, right now, it's not necessarily about the economics of it. Right now, it's about in-space security. That's what Cislunar is about right now, okay? Now, say what you will, depending on, your right, left, hawk, dove, you say what you want, but the bottom line is the reason why we've had the acceleration of economic growth within the entire planet right now is because of the security and safety and such that the American military has been able to provide globally and provide safe methods and ways of commerce across the oceans, okay, the seas. They protect commerce, they protect trade, it serves our national interests, it serves our everyday interests. Look at the supply chain issues just in COVID. Imagine if there was no American Navy to secure the seas and get those ships over here. It would be pandemonium. I kind of see the Space Force's role as kind of that next iteration within space. There cannot be economic flourishment in any domain, no matter what it is, without appropriate security within the domain, within that theater of operation. So right now, China is operating on the dark side of the moon. Depending on who you talk to, we don't necessarily know what they're doing on the dark side of the moon. That is a very big problem. So Cislunar, for me, is more about the security of what is to come. It's history. Every history lesson you see about exploring a new land or a new place, they send the explorers. NASA's done its job. They send out the security to secure the frontier, make it safe for everyone to come. And that is part of the doctrine. Freedom of access. If you look at space power doctrine for U.S. Space Force, it directly says maintain freedom of access within the domain. Period.
So you see that being the big sort of the big value add of the kind of lunar program out of Artemis
for the moment.
Okay.
For the moment.
Okay, let's move on from that. I think we spent enough time talking about lunar. Let's go talk about financing. We've got a sort of various companies, various stages of evolution. One obviously RocketLab that's gone public on the panel. There's been a lot of noise, a lot of hype about the sort of SPAC window that a lot of companies took advantage of over the last 2 years. It's kind of imploded slightly since then. In my world, the biggest news the last 2 weeks has been Silicon Valley Bank, which has been sort of exercising my mind pretty extensively. Maybe as early stage companies, later stage companies, Richard, you guys could talk about how you see the financing sort of ecosystem out there and what's worked and what's not worked, and whether something like SVB blowing up is going to be an impact on you guys.
You want to start with the early stage companies, or?
Yeah, let's go early stage, and then you can sort of. Okay. I'd love to hear your perspective on Virgin Orbit as well, given that they play in a very similar space to, well, not similar space, but to RocketLab. So.
Want to go, Jyostna? I can start. Sure. Well, I do have to tell you one other thing, that my perspective is a bit more from the European side. So I set up my company in France, and it's still a French company. So we did raise a little bit of money in the European ecosystem. So in that perspective, I think in the early stage investments, there is, in terms of space investments, still a big proportion of the money is government money, whether it is channeled through a VC fund or through a grant or through a government program, investment program. Irrespective of where it is coming from, a big portion is still government money at the end of the day. And that does create a lot of other kind of complexities in terms of regionality. So many times the amount of money available to you depends a lot on which country you're in or which country you're willing to open an office. So these all things do come into play, and it is still the case. This was the case last few years ago. It is still the case. I didn't see a big change in that. In the last few years, in the last few months, of course, the market has been a little bit volatile. But in early stage, I didn't see it change a lot like you would have seen here. Definitely, there were a few funds which were more cautious versus the others. The only other thing I would say is, well, we are in a geospatial ecosystem, so we do seek investments not only from the space team, space-focused funds, but also the non-space-focused, but industry-focused funds. One thing consistently we see is that in order to lead the round, the non-space-focused funds really hesitate, because they don't entirely understand the technology, they don't entirely understand the market. So we end up having to at least always have somebody who understands space industry, even though I don't necessarily consider that knowing my market is space market. It is still, geospatial market is still more industry-driven than space-driven.
Got you. Sort of a wider ecosystem of funders, it sounds like, which is a good thing in the most part.
Yes, yes. But one other very interesting thing is that in terms of these non-space industry funds, there are, at least in the last 2 years, there are more and more non-space focused funds looking into saying, how can I invest in space?
Right.
They are asking themselves this question. I don't know how many of them have reached to the answer, but definitely more of them are asking the question. And there was a gap between how many of them felt comfortable enough to invest. So European Space Agency came up with a really interesting program saying, hey, we have this office sitting inside European Space Agency for you, for the VC funds that need our support either for due diligence, look into the technical aspects, which I think is super interesting.
Cool, cool. Jordan, Jeremy, any thoughts, like raising early stage money?
Yeah, so I think, given the results of the last couple of weeks, Silicon Valley Bank and now Virgin Orbit, there's a lot of uncertainty. However, the needs on the government side are pretty clear, and they're becoming increasingly clear. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the venture capital world start to look for, maybe even more than they have in the past, look for validation from the government side. So there's a lot of different ways that companies can get some funding or get strategic partnerships with the government that helps to validate and do some of the due diligence on the technology, on the solutions. The government's maybe not interested in the actual market, in the end game, so the VC funds are certainly going to need to be very witting of those parts of the pie. But this is because, as we've mentioned several different times, this is a field where you might need a handful of PhDs working on a specific problem that I think those partnerships with the government are going to help the private capital and the venture capital to do their due diligence, at least as a first pass filter. Mm-hmm. So I think that, especially in the upcoming potential uncertainty, it's going to be, maybe rightly or wrongly is a different conversation, but it may be even more the case that the government starts to pick the winners.
Okay, should the government pick the winners?
So we'd mentioned the Cislunar is a government program, but so is the internet.
Yeah.
And so is mRNA.
So is PNT, right?
So is PNT. So I think that the government oftentimes has a history of starting really transformational programs and transformational technologies, but it's not until the market decides they want to put a movie studio in a cell phone that we really realize the full potential. So I don't think that it's a bad thing that the government starts to pick the winners at the outset, but I think that the government needs to allow the markets the ability to to do what they do best once they start to gain their own level of maturity.
Got you. Jeremy.
It's definitely a balance, and it's a really good analogy right there. Very, very quickly, the fundraising environment right now in terms of VC is challenging, and that would be an understatement of the decade. The second part is non-dilutive capital, sitters coming from the government. They're getting better at the consistency depending upon the program that you're getting into. Get in, get early, build those proposals, and build a pipeline. start writing proposals now. Even if you have a whiff of an idea of when that solicitation is going to drop, you better start writing those proposals and submit as many as you can. In terms of the SVB, Rogue outgrew our bank. We bank locally. We didn't have anything with SVB. Depending on who you talk to, some people are sticking with them, some people are not.
Safest bank on the planet right now.
Yeah, it really is. So I don't know where all that's going to lead. I'm more concerned about making sure Rogue is successful. We've got a couple of banks. We bank with Chase,
Richard,
Yeah,
way down the capital curve.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. Yeah, I mean, anyone that's not well capitalized right now is obviously in trouble. This is not a good time to not be well capitalized. And to pull on a few of the threads that you offered, Virgin was a great example of a company that was not adequately capitalized. Yeah. I mean, it's super important to execute, but you've got to have that runway. So there are certain things that are not uncertain, like poorly capitalized companies will likely not survive. And our CFO was very vocal in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago that the bloodletting is about to begin, and we saw that start this week. So it's not over. Whether it's a SPAC, SPAC is probably something to make a quick comment on. So we were very fortunate. I think our CFO looks like a genius with the timing of our SPAC, the size of the pipe that we were able to raise. But we took it very seriously. We were, I think, timed well. We had real revenue. We had very high integrity in our revenue recognition. And we had great bankers. We had bankers that were not going to let us cut any corners. It seems like others cut corners. And so I'm a little, every day I'm confused why there's not higher quality due diligence in a lot of these deals. I mean, we're seeing it in early, throughout the whole, early to late stage. But we had 3% redemptions, and that I think was a reflection of the quality of our deal. And so we're well capitalized now, and I think we feel good about the current situation. SVB was an interesting one. I don't know. We're still just seeing the effects now. I thought this week was going to be very different for me as we explored exposure across our customers. We're starting to find that a lot of the banks that are now appearing in the news are the answers I was getting at the beginning of the week. Why don't worry? And so I think it's a really interesting thing that we're gonna track. We had some petty cash at SVB. And my corporate card stopped working for a day, but we had made the transition away from SVP largely, to JP Morgan, and so yeah, I'm very concerned about the consolidation with the systematic banks today. I think there was one other comment that I wanted to make. Actually government. Yeah, I think government's a super important part of this. Gil Kilmer at the DISC conference, Defense Intelligence Space Conference, made the comment, former Raytheon guy, former DOD, there are no commercial space companies. And so I think the difference between some of the other ecosystems that have been seeded by government investment is that the outsized impact of government acquisition in space continues, and it will for our lifetimes. And so, you've got to have a government program. You've got to have a government plan if you're going to be in this space.
Yeah, I think we would agree. We see the U.S. government as probably, the first and the best customer for a lot of the companies that we work with. It'd be interesting to get some perspective from the panel of Jyostna, obviously being based in Europe. How do you think about the U.S. government as a customer? And then RocketLab, New Zealand sort of origins, but became a U.S. company very, very quickly. And then, Jordan and Jeromy, you guys are U.S. through and through. Any thoughts about how to sort of navigate that complexity if you're not a U.S. company that might be helpful for Jyostna?
So for us, one of the things I would say differentiates is the fact that my customer is usually not in the government at the moment. That definitely is a more difficult route to navigate. We are looking into, even in government, we are definitely not looking into DoD kind of agencies. We are more looking into Department of Agriculture, Department of Environment, so this kind of organizations. Honestly, as a non-US based company at the moment, we know it's not a route we can go.
Gotcha.
need to be registered here. That's something it is down the line planned. But yeah, that's a minimum requirement. I wouldn't otherwise even look into that. But I do see a lot of interest working with a lot of the, so I'm part of these geospatial groups, communities that are actually pushing the envelope on what is possible, as well as the standardization. And a big part of that, those communities are coming from the government agencies, be it the NGA, USGS, and they are even NASA, and a lot of them are actually the driving force behind how this industry is transforming. So we do have a
you have some insight and some
dialogue.
pipeline coming out of that. That's good.
Exactly.
That's good. That's good. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm happy to open it up for conversation and questions if there are any. If not, we can keep going. Does anybody have a question? Okay, we do. Let's open it for questions. Do you have any microphones? Or do we need microphones? Maybe we do. Here comes one right now. Thank you, Scarlett.
Thank you. My name is Jana Petrescu. Thank you so much for a very interesting panel. I think my question is for you because you have your company in France. One of my hats is that I'm a European Climate Pact ambassador. So if you want to organize a European Climate Pact event, it's a satellite event, usually advertised on the EU page. We can discuss about that because I think it's very interesting to communicate more to the environmental community. These are people who are very much interested in the European Green Deal, in the environment per se, and maybe they don't know anything about space and why in the world the space might help them. So just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was more of a statement than a question.
She wants to, so we can't force her.
Hi. A friend of mine sent me an XKCD comic that showed for various software libraries and architectures, you have this big complex thing, and then there's this one tiny little thing that's keeping the whole thing from falling over. That was a library maintained by somebody from 2008 or something, and the whole thing is generally fragile. It's holding on that one thing. And the past week and a half has kind of made me wonder, do we have similar fragility in funding for some of these systems that are starting to develop more, starting to appear more in the critical path for a lot of things in the DoD and in government more generally. Is that something that some of your government contacts are concerned about from a funding standpoint, from a overall robustness standpoint?
Yeah, I'll take that and maybe expand a little bit. I mean, absolutely. I think the financing, well, I'll actually turn around and say the government and really anybody, B2B relationships included, need to think very seriously about financial risk, whether it's a vendor relationship or a customer relationship. And so we have very strong due diligence that we do with customers, and if they're not willing to engage in that due diligence, then we won't do business. The government needs to get more sophisticated because when they do pick winners, we need to generally be focused on mission success. More expanded, the supply chain is extremely fragile right now. So we've seen with some very high-profile government programs how one component can cause a whole program to slip. And so supply chain diversity, it's actually one of the reasons why we love our components business. We invest in a lot of the component capabilities. We love being a merchant supplier. It's great business. And we look for places where there are poor choices or fragile supply chains, and that's where we're moving to try to add value. But yeah, there's a lot of fragility, I think, in the system right now.
And I can just give a comment on the funding side. I think you've seen that governments in the West have focused on this as an issue. The NATO's about to launch $1 billion innovation fund, focused on 20 or 22 of the NATO members. I think they recognize it as a systemic risk to innovation generally across deep tech.
I know that the Space Force and a couple of other groups within the innovation arena on defense, they're getting better and better at getting those cycles moving very quickly. The Office of Strategic Capital is getting stood up.
Example.
That is something that I cannot wait until that office is functional. We got an email just the other day. They work in cooperation with the Small Business Administration. I could do a dissertation on SBA and startup environment, but we'll digress.
I did a thesis back when I was here. That was looking at bringing financial concerns and evaluation tools into technical, systems of systems and architectural level decisions. And my government colleagues are, especially in the Defense Department, are very concerned with resiliency, whether that's capability resiliency, technological resiliency, and now recently supply chain, and hopefully soon very equally aware of and trying to address capital resiliency, because this is all one giant ecosystem, and no single part is necessarily more critical than any other part. It all has to work in synchrony.
Yeah, I would agree. Great. A couple questions over here. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Marcus Hervey. Had a question. What do you think would be the killer app that would move from a government economy to a commercial economy for your business?
A killer, say that one more time.
Killer app to go from government.
App. So a killer application or whatever it would be that would shift from more of a government economy, which we have now, to a commercial economy or customer base.
Ooh, man.
I will throw out, I think GPS that the government built and sort of has provided as a public good for everybody with our tax dollars has become a fundamental underpinning of everything we do. So that's a great example of a killer app. I think people can build on top of that very successfully.
In terms of Earth observation, I think it's not quite close to, but definitely I see a path towards it. But it is only a matter of time before the commercial aspect of it becomes much bigger than the defense aspect of it. And a lot of it is actually even accelerated with climate change. But it's still there's still a bit of time before, right now everyone is at this phase of, okay, I know this is interesting for the problems I'm facing. I'm testing how this works. I'm deploying it in a smaller scale. But it will become mainstream when this becomes successful. And it becomes a no-brainer, and it becomes a standard solution. Say, I just need to plug this in, and it's going to work. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I actually like that one. I think weather, right now, numerical weather forecasting really is the domain of government, right? And actually, it's interesting because the U.S. government does a lot worse than Europeans. The Europeans have invested in a lot, smaller grid sizes and higher performance computing to do that. So I think that area is ripe for disruption and really true commercial value and kind of putting together the full weather chain. Then when you extend that to longer timescales, you start to access the climate problems and can access value chains of systemic risk and insurance and other areas. I think that's an exciting domain.
So I know there's lots of other questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We have to move on to the next panel. So I'd like you all to join me in thanking our panelists. It's been great to get their input.
All right, thank you so much to all our panelists. You did a fantastic job. We are going to have a short 10-minute break, and we are going to reconvene here at 9:55 for our Trusted AI panel with Lockheed Martin. So we'll see you all in 10 minutes. Go get some more coffee.